Wait. Before we start, just want to make sure we're clear here. While this podcast talks about sobriety, mental health, and addiction, it is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety.
I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sonia.
And we're ex-sisters-in-law, brought together in marriage and bonded through our sobriety journey.
Join us as we talk sobriety, addiction, and everything in between. You're in for quite a ride. And our Substack is buzzing with amazing content, from creative mocktail recipes to insightful courses and reflective exercises. There is something for everyone. Don't miss out. It's a great way to add some extra joy and depth to your journey. Check it out. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety, and today we are joined by Marci Hopkins, a recovery expert, author, and longtime host of the award-winning talk show Wake Up with Marci. And Marci's the author of Chaos to Clarity, which chronicles her journey through abuse and addiction and the process of breaking generational and personal cycles to reclaim her clarity, agency, and self-trust. She recently celebrated 10 years of sobriety and continues to use her voice to reduce stigma around addiction and recovery. Welcome, Marci.
So great to be here. Thank you.
I'm so happy you're here. So can you share a little bit about your early life and what shaped your relationship with coping, with survival, and eventually addiction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, well, a really long story, because that's my life.
Take your time. That's what we're here for.
Well, we'll start off early childhood. So my mother had me very young. She just turned 19, and she was a baby herself, right? So, and this was in 1969, and my mother was already facing her own party demons. And so it was really difficult for her to now have a baby. So my family did step in, and it was like a group effort. But when I was about 6 years old, my mother was dating this guy, and I got in a little mischief, and I take you deep into the story. It's how I open up my book, Chaos to Clarity, that I was at my mother's boyfriend's house, and they partied. So, I would wake up early, and I would try to entertain myself, and I would stay in the guest room. And I was just, this one day, I was looking around trying to find something to do, and I found this Tootsie Roll can, and I thought it was filled with candy, and actually it was filled with coins, right? So it was a bank, but I didn't know exactly what it is. I didn't even know the value of the money, but I made this decision to take the silver money because I knew it was more. And my mom's boyfriend walked into the room much later when they woke up, and he actually went to pick up this Tootsie Roll can, and he was going to give it to me. And he was asking me why it was lighter. I said I didn't know. So, now I'm terrified because I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this. But he didn't believe me, and he grabbed me, and he took me down the hallway, and he proceeded to beat me right in front of my mother while she was lying in bed. And we were going to my grandparents' house that day for a family party. And I was told to keep it quiet. Do not tell your grandparents, right? But while we were there, some other things happened, and I got really upset, and I ended up telling my grandmother. And we were in the laundry room. I showed her the black and blue marks on my backside, and they kicked out my mother and her boyfriend. And my grandmother gave me an opportunity to live with them. So here I am, 6 years old, having to make this choice to go back with my mother or stay with my grandparents. Well, I ultimately decided to stay with my grandparents because I didn't, as much as I wanted to be with my mother, I didn't feel safe in that environment. And so that's kind of where the abandonment, so there was the abuse that happened there, the trauma of that. And then I remember vividly being on the phone with my mother, telling her that I made this decision to stay with my grandparents. And while she did ask me if I was sure about it, she didn't she didn't decide to not be with Tim anymore. It was kind of like I felt that she didn't fight for me, right? So that was heartbreaking. And so I stayed with my grandparents for 6 years, and I am grateful for that time because those were very formative years. My grandmother was my rock. While there was a lot of volatile situations within the home, because my grandfather did drink, didn't really realize his drinking patterns and stuff at that time. And then he would explode. There would be these huge explosions, and then everyone would act like nothing happened. So, there was no learning of communicating, and there was just the trauma of the explosions, and you didn't know when it was going to happen again. But then at 12 years old, my mother ended up meeting this guy, Richard Dick. And I always
That's a good one.
I know. It's just the irony of his name being Dick, and he was just he ended up being such a nightmare, right? So I was ecstatic about this marriage, and I'm going to get to go live with my mother and finally have this like fairy tale life that I had always wanted. And I remember at the wedding happened at my grandparents' home. And that actually was the first time I got drunk, I was 12 years old. And I don't really remember any consequences to it. I remember like somebody must have put me to bed. The next day I woke up and I didn't get grounded or anything. I don't remember ever getting in trouble, but drinking was very normalized with my mother, especially because during the time that I would go back and visit her when I was living with my grandparents, she was still with Tim. So I had a lot of fear being in that home and I couldn't sleep. And she started giving me like half a sleeping pill when I would try to sleep. And I have to remember, I'm like at this time, probably 8, 9, 10 years old. And then I remember I had a lot of stomach problems. And she would say, well, here, take a sip of my drink. That helps me go to the bathroom, that kind of thing. So it just was very normalized for me. And so I ended up moving in with my mother and my stepdad. And he had his own business. He's this tall, handsome man, and he made money. And I don't know. I was just so ecstatic about what my life was going to be. And the other thing that is important to say is that I moved schools like every 2 years. So moving and starting over was very normal for me in my life. And the reason I say this is that it affected my life going forward in my formative years in high school and then adult years. So what happened was we had a great about 6 months, and then sexual abuse started with my stepfather. And ultimately, I shared with my mother in this huge blowout fight that this happened. And my mother didn't end up leaving. And I told her that things were happening in my sleep. I just knew instinctively that it was happening. Now, things had happened during my awake life, but I just knew that something was happening in my sleep. And basically, her answer to that was, I can't leave and that I should wear more clothes. And she would try to figure it out. So I did that. I wore more clothes going to sleep, and we continued our life. Now these years were like 8th, 9th grade. During that time, I was failing all my classes. I was experimenting with alcohol on the weekends. I was becoming a bit promiscuous, like trying like little sexual acts with boys because I thought that that's what would get them to like me. And then it just, I just was pretending all the time that everything was okay. And how I did that was everything on the outside had to be perfect. I remember I would iron everything that I wore, the way that my hair was, the way that I looked on the outside just became so important to me because it was the only thing that I could control while the chaos was going on inside of me. And then the final straw with that was it was confirmed that my stepfather was doing things to me in the middle of the night. I woke up and his hand it was in between my legs. And I went to school that next day. And I think I might have been in ninth grade at this time. And I ended up telling my mother that this had happened because she could tell something was very wrong with me. And she ended up calling a hotline. And I thought, oh my God, I'm finally going to get out of this situation. Well, Richard ended up coming home. They went in the back bedroom and they were talking about it. And he ultimately said, I knew that this was happening and I wanted it. And I just remember screaming out like that it was a lie and that I didn't want it. And somehow Richard convinced my mother to stay, that this would never happen again. And she stayed. And so we ended up moving again. And that was right after my ninth grade year, we moved to another. I grew up in Houston, Texas. So there was another part of Texas that we moved to called the Woodlands, Texas. And, basically it was a bigger, beautiful home, but the same nightmare that I was living. And during those years, so that was basically like my 10th and 11th grade years. I kind of blossomed right before my 10th grade year. And so boys started becoming very interested in me. And so I started using that as, power for myself because I started trying to control the outcome of what I wanted. So I would focus in on somebody that I wanted. And then it was almost like a game. Like, so if I got the guy, then I had the power. And I was drinking on the weekends, had a lot of blackout weekends because it was my escape. And those years, I don't really remember a lot at the home. I remember school. I remember being with friends. I remember boyfriends, but I do not really remember being in the house. I think that I blocked that out. So I really don't know if anything else happened to me during those years. And then ultimately my junior year, I started going out with this guy and I basically moved in with him and his mother so I wouldn't have to be in the house. Right after my 11th grade year, my mother and my stepfather finally got a divorce because their drinking was at an all-time high. He became abusive to my mother. So I begged her not to move, and we stayed in the Woodlands because I was like, I can't start over again. I'm going into my senior year. And we ended up staying there. But you have to realize also that the drinking was very much a part of my life. I was just making it through school. Having a boyfriend was a priority for me because that gave me validation. And I really didn't have any direction in life. It was really just about being in a relationship. Always seeking that love. That's all I ever wanted. And so all the other stuff was secondary to me, but I knew I had to do it. So once I graduated high school, I left the house and I never looked back. So now this is, 18 years old, and I start going to clubs. So now I start experimenting with drugs, and that became my escape. So now it's drugs because at that time it was 87. That's when ecstasy and cocaine and that was all the big rage. And so I was drinking, and that just became my life. It became a party life. But then I knew that I had to go to school, right? So I started going to college, started off in junior colleges. because thank God I tried to get in this one college with the guy I was dating in high school, and he was a nightmare because it was so abusive, so controlling. It was an awful, awful relationship, but at least I was in a relationship. It's unfathomable, really, but what we do to ourselves just to be with someone, right? But I had no self-esteem. I had no worth. Ultimately, I lived my life through someone else's eyes. So whatever they wanted was what I would focus on because I never knew what I wanted. I never knew how to focus on myself. My mother was an alcoholic. I mean, I was taking care of her senior year of high school. So the role reversal was terrifying because she was drinking all the time. I didn't know she was going to kill herself. It just was a really, really drinking and driving. So it was a really hard time. So I'm in this party life. And there was one defining moment where, I don't know if you ever saw Melrose Place.
Yeah.
It would, right? So it's like the pool in the middle and the apartments surround this pool. So I am like, and this is what I'm living in at this time. And I'm like walking past this pool and there's this huge window and there's a reflection of me. And it was like I saw my mom. And I knew in that moment, like, oh my God, I am becoming my mother. And that moment I decided I got to get out of this lifestyle. I mean, everyone around me was partying. I mean, I was dating a drug dealer. Like it was bad. So I literally went and got all my stuff and I left and I moved back in with my grandmother. And I had been going back and forth between different colleges, trying to figure out my life. And again, that was an escape. So finally, my grandmother stepped in and she's like, let's get some testing done on you. Let's figure out where your interests lie, maybe what the best type of school for you would be. So I did this testing and it came out that I was a very creative person and a smaller school environment would be better for me. So I ultimately ended up going to the Art Institute of Houston. And I took the courses in music and video business. So that's what I got my degree in. Now, I got to preface this, that right before that, I ended up getting 2 DUIs. So that was a very, very chaotic time in my life. And I never thought I was going to pull out of it. But I ended up going to the Art Institute and I made it through. Graduating the Art Institute was the best thing that ever happened to me. But then it's like now trying to find the job. And I'm working in restaurants, which, by the way, that's a party lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right. So you're working to go out, you're making money to go out. I mean, it did support me, so I'm thankful for that. But, it's just constant chaos and constant changing my environment, thinking that things would change. And my father died during that time, and my father was never really in my life. And I broke down during that time. It was just, I had no coping mechanisms outside of drinking. Like drinking that was it. Like once I left high school, basically I drank every day. Yep. That's just became the pattern in my life. Now I graduated the Art Institute, still working in the restaurant business. I ultimately got a job running the camera at the Greyhound track. Now that job did not go well because I was making very little money. I had to drive a long distance. And of course my boss fell in love with me and there was this weird dynamic there. So ultimately I quit, went back to the restaurant business and, because again, you have to realize I did use my looks as power, to get what I wanted. And I don't know. It was just like, if there was someone in power, or if there was a guy I wanted, like, that became like some sort of game for me. It's just really because I had no self-worth is really what it comes down to. And I didn't know any other way to have power in my life outside of using it. So I quit that. And then I went to, I had an internship at a television station. So I knew that I wanted to work in television. And I went in for my first job interview for a company called Liberty Sports Communications. Now I'm about 23 at this time. And I knew it was an entry level in operations, which that's where you create the logs for the television networks. And it was a sports regional operations department. So I didn't get the job. And I went back to working in restaurants, and I didn't think that I would get the job. They told me they were going to get it contract work maybe around the holidays. And they ended up calling me back. And like, I ended up having this opportunity to get this job. And even though like my life was still chaotic, I guess I just had this survival mode. And I was going to do that job no matter what.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'd be in relationships. There are a couple of things, the patterns that showed up for me from this. I would be in a relationship. I would try to change the guy into the person I wanted him to be. There was always drinking involved. A lot of physical, first verbal and then become physical abuse. And so what I would do is I would go outside of the relationship. I'd find somebody else and I would bridge the relationship, meaning I was going to hurt, that person was not going to hurt me. I was going to have somebody else waiting for me. So when I left you, I could go right into another relationship, right? So that was a way I protected myself. Then when I got into work, I never was satisfied. It was, I knew every year or every 2 years, I had to move out of the job that I had and I was going to move up. And I believe that was just the survival and that drive inside of me, that even though I went through all of the abuse and the trauma, it created this fight inside of me that I have carried throughout my life. So that started the path into television.
And then when did that survival stop working?
So ultimately, I ended up moving to Denver, Colorado from Houston, Texas. And then I moved to LA with the company and ultimately became the director of on-air promotions for FX. I met my husband in LA. We got married. We had children, moved back. We moved to New Jersey, which is where he's from. I ended up getting in front of the camera in my 40s. Okay. So during that time, that was a lifelong dream of mine to get in front of the camera. So once I got in front of the camera, I'm now going through perimenopause. I'm trying to raise my children. And I knew that for me, I never wanted them to feel that abandonment that I felt. So I really became like a helicopter mom. I didn't want other people to raise my kids. So it was very hard for me to navigate that because I didn't want to have like a full-time person because I wanted to be the full-time person. Then when I was going through this process of the auditions, trying to get into the city to make the schedule work, to be available for the agents, wondering if I'm going to get the gig. Then I get the gig. How am I going to make it work? So there's all these factors. So just imagine this roller coaster of you're being auditioned or you're being a job interview. You're constantly in a job interview. You've got to perform. You're wondering if you're going to get the job. Then you get the job. Now, how are you going to make it work logistically with your family? Like it was constant for me. So I had no self-confidence. Again, all this stuff came up to the surface for me. So what I did was I started using alcohol as my liquid courage. So alcohol for me was, my drinking was at 5 o'clock, I'd pour my glass of wine, start cooking dinner. It was, it wasn't blacking out or anything. It just was just a part of my evening routine. And yes, partying more on the weekends, right? With friends or whatever, you may drink a little more. But now the drinking started during the day because I was drinking before auditions, thinking that somehow would help me. Maybe as this progressed, I started drinking when I was getting gigs. So it was commercial print, then commercial acting, then it was indie film acting. And so that became a very, very hard time for myself. And now the drinking, that slippery slope happened for me. I started hiding alcohol because my husband got this job and he was like, we got to change our drinking. We can't drink like we have been. And I became angry about that. So I started drinking more. So it was just like this whole cycle of my body becoming dependent, completely dependent on it. So the last day of drinking for me, and let me preface this by saying the year before I really surrendered and it was my last time to drink, I did make a decision to go into the 12-step program. I was up every night. I knew that my drinking had gotten out of hand. It was affecting my life. My husband wasn't happy. We weren't happy. So I made this decision to go to the 12-step program. But what happened at that time is I went 3 months without drinking. We went on a trip without drinking. But I started comparing my story in the rooms. And I was still a good mom, or I was still involved in many things, still in the community. Like I just didn't see myself like everyone in those rooms. And I convinced myself I didn't have a problem. And so, start drinking slowly. Then just that year, it was a sheer nightmare. So that last day of drinking was October 3rd, 2015. And at that time, I was 45 years old. And I went for a modeling gig. And I remembered going up the escalator and saying to myself, okay, Marci, I'd gotten to the gig. You don't need the wine. You can do this on your own. And I was so proud of myself that I had made this decision. Well, then I found out I was at the wrong mall. Now, quite frankly, I was living in a fog and wasn't really paying attention to the details, right, that my agent had sent me, which is ultimately why I ended up at the wrong place. So what do? I get in the car, open the wine, and now I am drinking and driving as fast as I can to try to make it to the gig. And I get there, I walk the show, and my girlfriend had come to watch me. So we went out afterwards. Now, this is lunchtime, and I've already had half a bottle. And we go to lunch, and I'm not eating a lot because I was basically drinking my calories. You're very bloated, and I'm trying to stay thin because I'm doing the work that I'm doing. So I had a martini. Then I think I had another glass of wine. Now I'm driving home. And she calls me because she was in her own car, and she said, "Hey, do you want to stop off and have one more drink? One more drink." And I'm like, "Well, my husband is not going to be home till night. Got a babysitter with the kids. Sure, why not? Like, this is my day away." Because my husband traveled all the time, and so I was resentful of that. So I would yes, I'm going to go out and play today. So we go for this drink, and I remember saying to my friend, the last thing I really remember saying to my friend is that I have to eat something. Like, I knew, like, at that point, like, if I don't eat something, I'm out. So she must have gone to the ladies' room or something, because I ended up going and getting in the car, and now I'm driving home in a blackout. And somebody calls an erratic driver, being me. And I ended up, I was parked on the side of the road in my neighborhood. And I guess I got off the highway, and I didn't ultimately know where to go at that point. And so there was a cop at my door, and I was sitting in the car, and I ended up being arrested for DUI. And of course, at this time, I'm terrified. I think I'm going to call my girlfriend, my drinking buddy, and she's going to get me out. And I'm somehow going to hide this from my husband. Like, he's not going to find out. Well, my husband ends up coming and picking me up. And I just remember seeing him, and my heart dropped. And she walked in the same time that he walked in. And of course, he hated her because what was going on in my life was her fault, which was not her fault. But I went to bed that night a victim. It was everyone else's fault. And I lived in that victimhood. It was always everyone else's fault. My unhappiness was everyone else's fault. Anything that happened to me was everyone else's fault. And when I woke up the next day, October 4th, 2015, I knew in that moment that I could no longer live that way. And I was about to lose everything that I'd worked so hard to build in my life. Like, if you saw my life on the outside, it would be one that a lot of people would envy, And I didn't appreciate it. I didn't know what I had because I was so knee deep in my disease and in my victimhood. But when I woke up that next day and recognized that I needed help, made the admission to myself that I really was an alcoholic, and I knew it at that time, that it's real and I need help. And I walked downstairs and I sat down with my husband on the couch, and I honestly thought he was going to leave me and take the kids. But he ended up embracing me. And it was the first time I felt that love that I'd always been seeking. I didn't even believe my husband loved me. I mean, that's how bad it was. It was just, I didn't know how to love. I didn't know how to be loved. I didn't know how to accept it, And it was like that surrender, that moment, it was like truly the weight of the world came off my shoulders. And I reached out to someone that I had met in the rooms the year before. And I started back to AA, and I never looked back. I was willing to do the work and do whatever I needed to do.
How did AA feel different when you went back this time?
Because I believed and knew I was an alcoholic. I knew I had this disease and I needed help. And I was willing to do whatever. I wanted what others had in that room because my way wasn't working anymore.
When you look back to the 3 months that you went originally and felt like these are my people, do you believe that we have to hit a rock bottom, or what would you tell someone who listens to your story and is like, well, I'm not that bad. I'm not that bad yet. Do you think we can get there without hitting a rock bottom?
Well, you would hope.
Yeah.
And there are people out there that don't have to hit a rock bottom. They recognize that alcohol is affecting their lives negatively, and they make a decision they don't want to live that way anymore. I hope with my story that I can encourage someone to look at their lives and how is your drinking affecting your life? Is it affecting your self-confidence, how you feel when you wake up in the morning, how you take care of yourself. Are you thinking about alcohol a lot? Is it affecting your relationship with your friends, your family, your work? You know, you can start to see the signs that your life is being affected by alcohol.
Yeah.
We also, a lot of times, will recognize that alcohol is not working for us. And I did this. I thought to myself, well, I can't imagine not living my life with alcohol. This is all I've ever known. And this has been my savior, right? But the reality is that if we can find a way through other people's stories to make a decision to get the help before the rock bottom, you don't have to go through. You would hope, I hope that somebody out there doesn't have to go through the trauma, the consequences to ultimately make that decision. And what I was saying is that I was looking for other ways to normalize my drinking by acupuncture or hypnosis or another form of exercise. But the reality is, for a lot of us out there, if you have the disease of alcohol use disorder, the only answer is abstinence. And I will say that I never thought that I would be happy without alcohol. I never thought I would have fun without alcohol. But it's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. And you hope somebody out there knows that they don't have to hit that rock bottom. But for me, I had to have the consequence. I had to have that for me to ultimately make that decision. Because our mind, our sick mind, plays tricks on us that it wasn't that bad. Right? Or maybe it won't be that bad next time I do this, because I'm going to tame my drinking. I'm going to try to drink something different. And it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
And in the 10 years you've been sober, and you've achieved emotional sobriety, during those 10 years, at what point did you really start to see the patterns that weren't random necessarily, and that they were part of a larger cycle? At what point did you really start thinking about emotional sobriety?
Well, what's interesting is I think emotional sobriety happened through the healing and the actions that I took each day. Mm-hmm. So the healing for me really happened through the 12 steps in AA. So there's quitting drinking, and then there's healing from the reason you are drinking, right? Because we are drinking for a reason, to mask a pain, whether it's grief, divorce, abuse, an abusive relationship, whatever it may be, right? So we have to find the ways to heal through those traumas in our lives. So when I started doing the work in the 12 steps, there were many things that really helped me. Now, surrendering and turning my life over to a higher power. We really need our higher power in spirituality in some capacity in our lives to know we don't have to do this alone. A lot of people get stuck in this place because we don't understand really what it is. And I get that, because our experience with it is whatever our experience growing up was, the organized religion, right? So for me, it became an energetic spiritual connection to my higher power, which is an energetic divine love. That's what I envision God as now, and that I am connected energetically. Then there is finding the forgiveness through those steps, forgiveness of others. Gratitude practice is priority to change our lives, to start to see the things in our lives that we do have. And as we start slowly doing that, it changes and shifts how we look at the world, how we look at our lives. And we become also kind of, we can see the solution. We can see the silver lining. We can understand that each thing that we go through is a lesson. So we start to visualize and understand things are very different in our lives. And we start to move past that shame and that guilt. When you're stuck in that, there's no way you can move forward. We understand the importance of service. There's just so much through those steps I learned, the actions that I took each day. And I have, like in Chaos to Clarity, I have in there what I learned through the 12 steps. I have in there the toolbox, my sobriety toolbox, the emotional toolbox. And these things literally shift the way you start living your life. And it's actually beautiful. I believe it or not, I am thankful for the trauma I went through, because I know now that I had to go through that to do the work that I'm doing today. I'm thankful I was an alcoholic, or I am an alcoholic, and I had to go through that work because therapy wasn't helping. I had to do the real work on myself and stop looking outside of myself and go within to find that healing. And it's a long road, and there's a lot of work to be done. But that continuous work each day, it gets easier and easier. Meditation is a big one. I literally, I'm really excited. I haven't really shared, but I've completed a book called Wake Up, You're Not Broken, What to Expect the First 30 Days of Sobriety. And that's going to be released April 7th. And it's everything that I learned through the first 30 days, what I went through, and what you will most likely go through, and the science behind it, what will help, what helped me, and also affirmations, why they help. We have to learn these interrupters, if you will. We have a way that we think, and we have to start to interrupt that negative thought pattern to start to shift the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we think about life. And those are the things that start to really start shaping our lives in a different, more positive way.
So I do want to talk about the first 30 days of sobriety, but just getting back to when you started working the steps, and in terms of forgiveness, you had a lot of feelings towards a lot of people, I'm sure, that you had to work through. And so how did that show up in your journey, feelings towards your mom or your stepdad?
Yeah.
How did you break that cycle?
Forgiving someone is really difficult. But what you have to realize through forgiveness, that you are not saying the action is okay. You are not forgiving the action or the pain that person put on you. What you are doing is you are releasing the power that person has over you. So I ultimately, for instance, my mother, how did I forgive my mother? My mother died about 5 years ago from her addiction. And so I had to do a lot of work. But the way that I was able to forgive, and this is how we can do this visualization, like separate yourself from that person. So I stripped the title of my mother as my mom. I had to look at my mother as the child, the woman, her coping mechanisms, her addiction, what she went through in life, see her weaknesses, and have to recognize that she knew no better, and she did the best that she could. And I know my mother loved me, but she didn't know how to care for herself. So how is she going to care for another human being? And I had to let it go. I had to let it go. And that is freedom to let it go. And then if the person in your life is still alive, you get to make that decision if you heal the pain with that person. But you don't have to invite that person back into your life. You just let them go.
Yeah,
and let go that power.
Yeah, that's so important, that forgiveness doesn't mean having a relationship.
Yeah, it does not.
And so it seems like when you talk about that relationship, there weren't a lot of boundaries. Is that something you learned in the last 10 years, was to set boundaries in your relationships?
So I have learned to create boundaries for myself because I did not know how to create boundaries for myself, right? I mean, those boundaries had been stolen from me so many times. So I actually have created this method called the CARE method. And this is what I've learned through my healing, and I help others with this now. So CARE, communicating effectively, the importance of our words, how we communicate with others, and understanding that when you are speaking with somebody, the perception and having empathy, right? So that's the communication, how important that is and how to do that. Then there is asking for help without guilt, because especially as an alcoholic, we feel like we've got to do it all on our own. I knew for myself, if I asked for help, I felt like I was failing in some way. But asking for help is actually the strongest thing that you can do. And no one's viewing you the way that you think they're going to view you. And so learning how to ask for help and not feel that guilt or shame around it. Then reinforcing your boundaries, right? This isn't about being a jerk. This is about creating healthy boundaries for yourself. Stop being the people pleaser. How are you going to prioritize yourself? Put on that oxygen mask first so you can be the best version of yourself, right? And then embracing your worth, knowing your worth, because it's so hard for us to know our worth. We're always expecting others to see our worth. But the reality is we have to understand and embrace our own worth before others are going to truly see and respect us in the ways that we want them to. So there are many steps through this process. And through this healing, I have been able to learn how to stand up for myself without yelling and screaming and trying to get my way, but to communicate in my needs and to set those healthy boundaries when I need something, right? So if somebody asks you to do something, you get to decide, is that lighting you up? Is that something that you really want to do? Or is that something you're saying yes to because you want approval and acceptance? And that's what I had to do the work and discover for myself.
What are some, so that is, I would say, the biggest part of my emotional sobriety is working through that self-worth piece. And I still struggle with it. What are some of the interrupters and affirmations we can use for that?
Well, affirmations, first of all, they really do change the chemical makeup of your brain, right? So these are things that you can say. For me, like I'll say, I am worthy. Everything is always working out for me. I am lovable. I am kind. I am smart. Because one of the things I used to always say about myself is I am stupid, right? And I thought I was stupid. Nobody loves me. I am lovable. So these are things that you start to say, and you need to do them daily, right? Write them down, put them around your home in places that you can see them and be reminded of them. Now, you may not believe them in the beginning because, my God, you've been talking to yourself so so meanly for so long, right? We are our own worst critics. We're brutal to ourselves, and we have to learn how to be kind to ourselves and give ourselves compassion and think about ourselves like, would you talk to your friend that way? Absolutely not. Right? So starting to rewire the neural pathways in our brain. And that happens over time with these affirmations, right? And asking yourself, like, I can't do this right now, right? But don't say, I can't do this right now. Ask yourself, what do I need right now? What am I feeling right now? What's going to work for me right now? So asking yourself the questions that you can really bring to light what is going to work for you at that time, instead of being negative and saying you can't do something, or you're not worthy, or I'm too afraid. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid? Are you worried about something that you can't control? What can you control? Right? So asking yourself the questions so you then can start writing this down and start really looking at, what is going to work for me? I'm doing this. I'm doing that. This could work for me. I'm worrying about this. I don't have control of this. Do I really have control of anything? No, you only have control of how you show up, how you do the work. You can only change yourself. You cannot change or control anyone else or the outcome of anything else.
Yeah, that is such good advice. And so when we talk about chaos to clarity, that's such a powerful title. What does clarity look like in real life? And I think we were just touching on that with what you were talking about.
So clarity does come from the work that I've spoken about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So chaos is this way of just like, you're just living in constant craziness, right? You just like your insides, you feel like your nerve endings are on fire all the time, right? Like you're in this fight or flight all the time. And because your nervous system is truly on overload, and alcohol just contributes to that. We think alcohol like calms us, but it really doesn't. And then we don't sleep well, and it's a whole scientific domino effect to make things worse for ourselves. So, and another thing I want to say is, if you live in chaos and you have lived in chaos, even though you say you don't want it, it is comfortable for you, and you will continue to live in it and create it for yourself. But you start doing the work. You start making these changes. You start meditating. You start going inward instead of outward. And you start getting these glimpses of peace, clarity, direction in your life. And the more that you do it, the more you start to understand your path to happiness in this life. And the other thing that I share a lot about in my book is seeing the signs from the other side. Mm-hmm. And I have many, many beautiful stories around that. And then breaking those generational cycles. Because what we are handed was handed by those that reared us, right?
Yeah.
But we get to make a decision as we get older, to change that if it's not working for you. You get to create your values, your belief systems, what's really working for you. You get to make that choice. It's just knowing it and believing it, and then starting to make the changes for yourself and learning how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so as we kind of wrap up, what conversations around addiction and recovery do you think we're still avoiding as a culture?
Well, I think it's really important. I mean, you say around the conversations, we need to normalize the conversation. More of us need to talk about it. More of us need to get educated about it. A lot of times when I talk about addiction, a lot of times the conversation will go to the homeless, right? And that is an extreme. That is an extreme. And yes, the homeless do suffer. But it is your next door neighbor. It is your aunt. It is your cousin. It is your sibling. It is your husband. It is yourself. It is affecting over 49 million Americans a year. It is so important that we begin to understand that this is a disease and we must approach it as that. And when we stay stuck in the shame and the guilt, we stay sick. And it is something that all of the family must change, must educate themselves on.
Yeah.
You can't do it by yourself. And if your family is not making changes for yourself and you walk back into the same situation, you will be triggered. You will be triggered and a possible relapse will happen. And you need to make decisions on who you're surrounding yourself with, people, places, and things. I mean, those are priority in your recovery. But I just want to say that this is so important to me, and I will share so openly about this because when we do this, we are sharing hope. Like I said, we are bashing the stigma, normalizing the conversation, and we are helping others through our stories to normalize sharing their story.
Mm-hmm.
Because you went through what you went through to help somebody else too. And as you are sharing your story, you are healing. When you bottle that up, you stay sick in that story.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's another truth you would leave our listeners with today about the journey?
Well, first of all, that you are not alone. You are not broken. And you are worthy. Be kind to yourself, compassionate to yourself, and reach out for help.
Yeah. If someone had told me to be compassionate to myself about my drinking, it would have made a difference because it was just such a, bashing myself about it for so long. So
I did
love
it too.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that, to tell people to have compassion for themselves. So Marci, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I
love it.
Yeah. And I can't wait for your new book because I think those 30 days are so critical with quitting drinking. And I think it's so important to have whatever support and that you can get. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again for all the work you're doing and for having me on the show.
All right. And thank you all for listening to Sisters in Sobriety. And we will see you next week. This was Sisters in Sobriety.
Thank you for listening and being with us today.
If you want to learn more about sobriety and meet your community, find us at sistersinsobriety.substack.com.
Are you a sister in sobriety? Then reach out on social media. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're feeling generous, leave us 5 stars and a review and follow us wherever you listen.
You'll never miss an episode. Until next time.